Good day to all of our investors and guests. This is the Rudd Commentary Podcast, and I'm your host, Josh Rudd. And for those of you who don't know, I'm the managing partner and principal wealth advisor here at Steer Wealth. For all of our new listeners who may not be familiar with who we are, at Steer Wealth, we manage investments for successful families, high-performing professionals, and organizations across the country, and become your very own proactive investment management team, confidant, and personal wealth advisor. So you can relax and focus your time and energy on chasing what's important to you. So last month's topic of estate planning was a great discussion and covered many important matters for investors to consider. We were also able to discuss some of the key risks investors may face when they don't update their estate plan periodically or when they have a major life change. What's interesting is right after we released the estate planning episode, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal. It was on June 8th titled, "His Ex is Getting His $1 million Retirement Account and They Broke Up in 1989. That sounds kind of funny, doesn't it? I mean, folks that were just married for, I think in this case, a couple of years, it's been so long ago, and somebody passes away, and current family doesn't get a retirement account. It goes all the way back to somebody that they were married to 40 years ago. So that doesn't sound right, does it? And in fact, it's a little bit disturbing for those of our investors and listeners who have retirement accounts, 401ks, and beneficiaries. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about reviewing our beneficiaries and making sure that those beneficiaries are reviewed periodically and updated when they need to be. So before we begin, it's important that I give a brief disclosure. All my listeners know Steer Wealth is an investment advisory firm. We are not attorneys or CPAs, so we're going to be talking about some topics that are going to meander through some legal and tax topics, so it's important that you check with your qualified legal professional or tax professional before making any changes based on what you hear on this episode. So let's start just with the basics. What is a beneficiary? So put very simply, a beneficiary is a person or an organization that gets your money if you pass away. So the big question is, doesn't your will do that? Not necessarily. So first, let's get started with the types of accounts and assets that have beneficiaries. The most obvious one is going to be life insurance. People take out life insurance for many reasons, but the most common that we run into is replacing the income from a high-earning spouse or paying off debts or paying for final expenses that's triggered by someone passing away. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? You need to have a beneficiary on a life insurance plan and know where that money goes so that it can do what you're paying for. Other types of accounts that have beneficiaries are retirement accounts, and these are what a lot of us think about when we think of beneficiaries. So these are going to be accounts like our 401k at work, our individual retirement accounts, our 403b, 457 plan, even pension plans. The organization needs to know where to send your accumulated benefits, which could be money or a series of payments, who they send those benefits to if you were to pass away. Other accounts and assets that you may not think about are just bank assets or investment accounts. So bank assets like certificates of deposits may have what's called a payable on death. If that CD matures or if anything happens to you, the bank knows where to send those proceeds if you pass away. You can also have what's called a transfer on death on an investment account, which generally does the same thing. And finally, some other types of accounts that investors may not think about are health savings accounts. A lot of us have done that since the cost of healthcare insurance has increased dramatically. Flexible savings accounts are another one. And you may have a beneficiary on a college plan or a 529 that you set up for your children. So as I said, having these beneficiaries on all these types of accounts make it easy for the organization to know where to pay those benefits if anything happens to you. Well, now let's talk about the types of beneficiaries that you can have. So regardless of the account, you've got some choices on who to include. And I get those questions a lot when we're setting up new accounts or when we're doing our investment policy reviews with our clients. Who can I list as a beneficiary? Well, it may come as no surprise that the most common beneficiary is probably going to be your spouse. It's very, very simple if you've been married one time and you have a spouse, listing them as your beneficiary. That's not complicated. Let's go ahead and add children to that. So you're married to your first spouse, you have some children. Do you list your children as beneficiary? Again, you'll definitely want to talk to your attorney if you have any complicated questions. But generally, no. Many of you may be thinking, well, why? Why can't I list my children as beneficiaries? The challenge with that is if anything happens to you, if they're not over the age of 18 in many states, they can't receive those funds. And so basically a court is going to decide what happens to your money. So it's best not to list minor children as primary beneficiaries. I'm also not a fan of listing them as contingent, as Carol and Dove discussed on our last podcast. There are many other ways to do that, either through a trust or other mechanisms that will be a much better choice for those of you that are considering listing children as contingent beneficiaries. So spouse is the primary, and we talked about earlier, first spouse. So what happens if we have a second spouse, third spouse, and we've been married multiple times and have blended families? You need to take some more time and think about that and consult with an attorney. Once you start having blended families or on second and third marriages, it can complicate that situation. I know we talked about on our last podcast here that with multiple marriages, the surviving spouse has the option in a lot of cases to change beneficiaries. And that may or may not be what the deceased spouse wanted. So definitely talk to your attorney if you've been married multiple times and you have any questions about listing spouses and children from blended families as beneficiaries. So that brings us to the second category of beneficiaries, which are non-spouse family. So as we talked about, we definitely don't want to list minor children as beneficiaries if we can help it. But what about adult children? That's extremely popular as beneficiaries, especially if you are an older individual listening to this podcast today and your spouse has already passed away. Listing older children is very normal. We see that all the time. We also get questions about listing parents as beneficiaries. So I'm not a fan of listing parents as beneficiaries unless there is really limited options or unless there's a specific need. And the reason is parents are older than us. And life expectancies the way that they are, unless you have some type of a known or terminal condition, that's something that you definitely should try to avoid, because I think that's going to put you in most cases in a situation where you're going to have to revise that beneficiary option at some time in the near future. As we said earlier, many individuals don't update or review their beneficiaries as often as they should. So the last category that I'd like to review as far as beneficiaries are non-family beneficiaries. And these are becoming more and more common, especially for families that are working with an attorney and really working hard to craft a well thought out estate plan. So the first and most common that I see are trusts. So if you are a family and you're building wealth and you're trying to avoid listing your children as a beneficiary, I know some of the common alternatives that I've seen are listing some type of a trust for the benefit of your children or beneficiaries as a beneficiary on those retirement accounts or life insurance policies. Another popular non-family beneficiary is just simply listing an organization, which are normally nonprofits. And I think I'm paraphrasing Warren Buffett here, but I remember him saying he had no desire to create several little Buffett millionaires running around after he passed away. So I believe one of his large charities is the Gates Foundation that he's listed in his estate plan. And I would encourage our investors that have a well thought out giving or legacy plan to really consider doing the same. There are a lot of good organizations out there that could benefit handsomely by you including them in your estate plan and listing them as beneficiaries or partial beneficiaries or full beneficiaries on an IRA here or a life insurance policy there. So that's something that's not uncommon for us to see. Finally, in the non-family category are just other individuals. We will see from time to time individuals listed as beneficiaries that are not related to the family and are not part of an organization. And those usually come up when there's someone specific that a family is wanting to benefit, someone with a greater need, someone that a family or an individual is trying to help out. So not common. We don't see that often, but it doesn't surprise me when we do see those. So definitely an option for you if you're considering that as well. So now that we've gone through the types of accounts and types of the beneficiaries, I'd like to just make one comment before we go into the most common mistakes to avoid when choosing beneficiaries. And that's the fact that beneficiaries on life insurance policies and retirement accounts and the like, they bypass probate. So let me explain what that means to our listeners today. Let's say I have a will and my will says that everything that I have goes to my spouse. Very much like the Wall Street Journal article that I mentioned earlier. If I have information as a beneficiary in a life insurance policy or a retirement plan that is not in line with my estate plan, Guess which matters? Well, it's the beneficiary on the life insurance policy or the retirement account that matters. In fact, when we process distributions after a client passes away, we do not follow the estate plan. We follow the beneficiaries that were listed or updated by our client. It's a contractual agreement between the client and the custodian to distribute those assets to the beneficiary who's named in the document. And that's really what that Wall Street Journal article was all about. If you have a beneficiary from 35 years ago, it could have been someone that you're married to, like in the article, for 18 months, and you get remarried 2 years later and you have a long marriage of 30 years and you have 5 children and you have grandchildren and you pass away and you've got several $1,000,000 in your IRAs, it's very unfortunate that if you forgot to change your beneficiaries, I think there's going to be quite a court battle trying to figure out where those assets go. And I can tell you that the odds are not in your favor if your name is not listed on that form. So beneficiaries are extremely important, and that's the reason why we're covering these today. I cannot press enough upon this issue, and that's also why at Steer Wealth we review beneficiaries on an annual basis or anytime there's a life change. So finally, in the podcast today, I want to talk about some common mistakes to avoid for our listeners today. The simplest is just having outdated beneficiaries. Each time we meet with our clients, generally annually, and we are reviewing their investment policy and we're reviewing changes over the last year, we're talking about beneficiaries. We're printing out the beneficiary forms from the various custodians that we use. We're showing those to our clients, and we're making sure that there have not been any changes, whether that's changes in lifestyle, big life events, or some individuals, unfortunately, may have passed away, and we need to reallocate those assets elsewhere. Another one is not naming a beneficiary. When you set up a new investment account, that's a pretty big deal. And I know the process can take some time. And in fact, we joke here in our office that sometimes it's like buying a home. There's a lot of forms to fill out. But the reason we go through all that meticulous detail is because we want to get this stuff right. And we need to dot our I's and cross our T's, because this is important stuff. This is your life savings. You may have sold a business, you may have retired, or you may just be saving for your future. And this is very important. That's a very important goal. So we want to make sure that the beneficiaries are correct. And so it's important to take the time, fill out that paperwork, and to list a beneficiary. Because I hate to tell you, if you don't have a beneficiary, very much like what our prior guest said on the prior podcast about not having an estate plan, if you don't have a beneficiary, the state or the government will have one for you. And that may not be in your or theirs best interest. The third mistake I'd like for investors to really think about is listing a state as beneficiary. Remember that a beneficiary or a transfer on death or a payable on death bypasses probate. So one of the objectives is for this distribution to bypass probate and go directly to the beneficiary. Listing a state as a beneficiary defeats that purpose. It can cause real problems. That's something that we try to avoid here at Steer Wealth, and something that I would encourage you to always avoid. When you open a new account or you're updating your beneficiaries, list a beneficiary. Try not to list a state. The fourth mistake I see a lot of investors make, we've already discussed briefly today, which is listing minor children. And I'll just summarize by saying that, again, if you pass away and money is going to a minor through a beneficiary designation, that the court is most likely going to decide, or someone else is most likely going to decide, how that individual accesses and gets those funds. So if you want to maintain control and you want the assets to pass as you've indicated, please think about that. And as our prior guest described, there are ways to do that through different estate planning methods. The last mistake to avoid is very important, and it's not discussed very often because it just doesn't come up, and that's listing anyone as a beneficiary with special needs. That can really impact that individual's benefits. A lot of special needs individuals are receiving benefits or do have some type of a trust or plan that's going to provide for them for the rest of their natural life. And you need to consult an attorney who specializes in special needs care or special needs planning before you list a special needs individual as a direct beneficiary on a life insurance policy or a retirement account. So that's just something that I thought would add some value on this program today that not a lot of individuals hear about. One more thing that's not so much a mistake with a beneficiary that I think our listeners need to know that could really save you some problems in the future. Over the last several years, it's become very popular for individuals to list their adult children as joint account holders on bank and investment accounts. You know, at Steer Wealth, we're not a fan of this. We have seen a lot of challenges in distributions after the passing of a client that are caused by an adult child or an individual being listed as a joint account holder. And if you think about this with me, it can really cause some problems. Let's say I've got multiple children and I have one of my children, let's just say it's the oldest, that helps me, doing things like paying bills and organizing my checkbook and balancing my accounts and just the day-to-day things as I'm starting to have trouble remembering. And it sounds logical, right? Let's put them on our bank account or on our investment account so they can have access to information and talk to these organizations more easily as they do. The real challenge here and the reality of what happens is as the account holder passes away, now you have a remaining account holder, which is that child, that adult child, that's the owner of the accounts. And if there's multiple siblings there, I hate to say this, but the reality is that individual in many cases doesn't always follow the estate plan or doesn't always follow the wishes of the original account holder, in this case, the parent. So I would consider other options and talk to your attorney. The same goals can be achieved by listing that individual as a power of attorney and just putting some controls around that just to make sure those assets end up where you believe that they should be after your passing and can really benefit those individuals that they need to benefit. Well, I hope this brief discussion was beneficial. We here at Steer Wealth make a point to review all of our clients' beneficiaries with them at every meeting. And I know it may take some time, as we discussed before, but as you now know, this is a critical part of a well-managed financial strategy. For those listeners who are not our clients, your wealth advisor should be doing this on a regular basis or when you have a life change. If they're not, please feel free to reach out to our team here, and we would be glad to do a quick beneficiary check with you over the phone. We can be reached at info@steer.com. That's info@styre.com. Well, as always, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen today. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something new, please take time to rate our podcast and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or your preferred podcast platform and never miss an episode. Also, if you know other investors that would enjoy the show today, please share the Rudd Commentary Podcast through email or on social media. We also like feedback on our program and ideas for future topics if you have the time. We would enjoy hearing from you. All of us here at Steer Wealth would like to thank you, our investors and clients, for your trust. Thank you for allowing us to be your partner in your long-term financial journey. We take our role very seriously. Thank you very much for listening today. This is the Rudd Commentary. I'm your host, Josh Rudd. And from all of us here at Steer Wealth, invest long and prosper.
The Rudd Commentary is distributed for informational purposes only and is not intended to constitute legal, tax, accounting, or investment advice. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell or solicitation for any offer to buy any security. All investment strategies and investments involve risk of loss, including the possible loss of principal invested, and nothing herein should be construed as a guarantee of any specific outcome or profit. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Any opinions expressed by employees of the Rudd Company, DBA, Steer Wealth, are opinions and do not reflect the opinions of any affiliates. The opinions expressed by guest speakers are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Steer Wealth or any affiliates. Guest appearances on this program does not imply Steer Wealth's endorsement of any entity, person, product, service, or investment. All opinions are current and only as of the date of recording and are subject to change without notice.